Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here to the BSA and to the people online. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to have you. There's a huge number of people online, actually, so you'll be all very pleased to hear. So welcome to the first event of the new academic year for the BSA. My name is Rebecca Sweetman, and I have the privilege of being the director of the British School. As most of you know, the BSA has been innovating and collaborating for some 130 years. And while its earlier focus was quite firmly in the realm of archaeology and ethnography, its people played active roles in the shaping and communicating of Greek history at key moments in its time. In the last few decades, the BSA has turned its attentions to modern Greek studies and has shown its commitment to this discipline in its inclusion in the remit of the BSA, and most recently articulated in the appointment of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Fellowship in Modern Greek Studies. This area of the BSA's work is now one of its most active, thanks in part to the work of David Holton, who is chair of the Committee for the Study of Arts and Letters, and indeed our chairman, Professor Roddy Beaton. I'm going to hand over to David in just a minute. And I'm very grateful to David and our speakers, Bruce and Sophia. And if you'd like to know more about the BSA, please do have a look at our activities on the website. We've got a whole set of events coming up, and our new events coordinator, Katrina, will also be here and able to tell you a little bit more about them. But there's a huge range of events coming up. And also there's new possibilities to become more involved in the BSA than before. I have to give you a fair warning. This is also where I live with my two revolting children. They're boys, aged 12 and 14, hence the reason they're revolting, and a dog and a cat. At any moment, they could invade this space. So just sit tight. They've been bribed. I've sent them off for supper. And they've taken the dog. They couldn't take the cat, but they've gone for supper. So I hope it'll be reasonably quiet. And with that, I would like to welcome David Holton to chair this session. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca, for that introduction. May I add my words of welcome to everyone here in the upper house at the BSA, and all those nearly 100 people, I think, watching this seminar online. One thing I want to stress straight away is that this is not intended to be a couple of lectures, but an interactive discussion, and comments from the audience and from those online will be very welcome, because the speakers hope to learn as well as to teach as part of this process. Anniversaries, they can be very useful, not just as acts of remembrance, but as a stimulus for new research and reassessment of the evidence. Greece has had a spate of anniversaries to commemorate in the last few years. First of all, the bicentenary of the outbreak of the revolution in 1821, and the beginning of the struggle for independence. The establishment of the London Committee as part of the Philhellenic movement in support of the insurgents, which was the subject of a conference organized by the BSA in Athens earlier this year. Last year was, of course, the centenary of more distressing events, the rout of the Greek army and the destruction of Smyrna in 1922. The peace conference which followed in Lausanne resulted in the Treaty of 1923, 100 years ago, as of July or August, depending on which date you take. That treaty imposed, as you all know, the compulsory exchange of populations that lies behind this evening's seminar. The fact that the criterion for exchange was religion rather than language or ethnic consciousness created anomalies that had lasting consequences. One of these anomalies is the focus of our event, the case of the Muslims of Crete, whose language was Greek, in fact, the Cretan dialect, not Turkish, but who were forced to relocate to Turkey. Bruce Clark will present a picture of the Muslim community of Crete as it was before 1923. And he will discuss their contribution to economic and municipal life of Crete in the main towns and their relations with Christians at that time. Sophia Kufopoulou will discuss how that community fared in its new homeland, Cunda, or Ali Bey Adası, which was formerly known as Moskonisi, and to what extent that community was able to preserve its distinctive Cretan identity in later years. Bruce, then, our first speaker, really needs no introduction. He's the author of a groundbreaking study of the exchange of populations, Twice a Stranger, How Mass Expulsion Forged Modern Greece and Turkey, which was published in 2006, and there is a Greek translation with the main title, Diophores Xenos. The book won the Runciman Award in 2007. His first book was actually about Russia, An Empire's New Clothes, The End of Russia's Liberal Dream. That was published in 1995. More recently, he's published a magisterial study of Athens, Athens, City of Wisdom, which came out in 2021. The title of Bruce's presentation is The Cretan Muslims Before the Exchange of Populations. Bruce, over to you.
Well, what a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to see in the audience people who I know have deep connections with Crete, Chania, who will certainly be able to contribute a great deal to the conversation, which I merely hope to stimulate. Now, by way of introduction, I want to dedicate my talk, for what it's worth, to the people and the mayors in particular of Rethymnon over the years, to their memory. And I will name some of those mayors. Yusuf Alivizakis, a rich man apparently, but illiterate. Husni Vayoglaki, also quite a rich man and highly educated, of whom much more later. Michalis Papadakis, Menolos Papadakis, and then the longest standing mayor of Rethymnon in the 20th century, Titos Petihakis. And then not to forget a close friend of mine, Dimitris Petihakis, a well-known television star of Greek reporting, Greek economic reporting, who unfortunately died earlier this year. And now we don't know exactly what relation he was to Mayor Petihakis, but I think that this picture shows there was definitely a family resemblance. He's definitely part of the clan. So I dedicate these remarks also to the memory of Dimitri. Now, thinking about the atmosphere in Lausanne in July 1923, to understand the pressures on the negotiators in Lausanne and also the other stakeholders in the negotiating process, the people affected by that process, one can turn to a very short and succinct report, which appeared in the London Times, dated July the 18th, 1923. Now, let's go to Lausanne. Delegations representing important groups of Turks resident in Crete and Macedonia, now in this context, Turks, of course, refers to Muslims in general, have petitioned the Greek government for exemption from the forthcoming compulsory population exchange of civil populations provided for in the Treaty of Lausanne. Although the Athens government has not announced any decision, it is believed that the reply will point out the impossibility of acceding to this request, owing to the overwhelming difficulty of finding homes for the Greeks expelled from Anatolia by the Turkish government. It is understood that the Greek government would like to avoid the economic loss involved by the uprooting of the Muslim population and the waste involved in the transition, but the necessity of providing homes for the refugee populations may force it to carry out the exchange without any exemptions. And that's exactly what happened a few days later. Literally, in a matter of days after that report, the full Treaty of Lausanne was concluded. And in the case of Crete, which is the focus of tonight's discussion, the execution of the exchange actually went into action very quickly, within a month. In August 1923, the first ships began bringing parties of Muslims from the ports of northern Crete to Anatolia, and this process continued quite intensively until August 1924, and the total number of people affected was about 23,000. Now, one of the things to say about the population exchange as it affected Crete is that, in a sense, it continued a process that was in progress already. A huge number of Muslims had already left Crete after 1898, when the Ottoman garrison left Crete. Tens of thousands of Muslims left then, and they went not only to Anatolia, they went in some places to Syria, creating a little sort of Greek-speaking enclave in Syria. They went to the Dodecanese, they went probably in a few cases to North Africa. So there already had been an exodus of Muslims at the very end of the 19th century. This exodus became a trickle, rather, in the early 20th century, but nonetheless, a good many Muslims had left. But in a sense, this sharpens the dilemma of those who were still left, because by definition, those who were still remaining in Crete, because by definition, these were the people who were the most deeply attached to Crete, the people who had small businesses, businesses in trades like leather making or soap making or olive works in the ports along the north coast of Crete, people who really had an economic stake in remaining in Crete and thought that they were, even in a Crete that was united to Greece, they were prepared to make a go of it. So in this sense, as we'll see from various extracts I'll read now, it came as a tremendous shock to those Muslims who were most attached to the island. Let's have a look at Venizelos signing the treaty and contemplating the treaty. It's very hard to put oneself inside the mind of Venizelos at this moment, because he had expended enormous political capital in persuading all sides to accept the sacrifices of the Treaty of Lausanne. There were some painful territorial concessions for Greece, but nonetheless, he was convinced that this was going to lay the foundations of a lasting Greek-Turkish friendship, which indeed he personally sealed from 1930 onwards. So he invested tremendously in the treaty, and yet the vision of Greece and Turkey, and in particular his home island of Crete, that was, so to speak, cleansed from a religious point of view, was not one that he had always held. And that might be surprising to some people. Actually, in the first decade of the 20th century, when Venizelos was active in his native Crete, he makes a remarkable statement in November 1906, to be precise, laying out his belief that whatever may happen, the Greek kingdom will have a substantial population of Muslims, and indeed it will be judged by its ability to administer and look after its Muslim population, in a just and fair way. So we have this rather extraordinary quote from Venizelos in the Cretan Assembly, November 1906. The expansion of the Greek kingdom, which we desire, cannot come about without the enlarged Greek state incorporating elements of other ethnicities and religions. With regard to the religiously aberrant population, they are most likely to be Muslim. So the Greece that we hope and expect to come into existence is destined to be a Muslim power in the same sense that Britain and Russia are Muslim powers. In other words, just as the British Empire has many Muslim subjects, the Russian Empire, he could have said the same about the French Empire, we too expect a Greek state that will have many Muslim subjects, and we will be judged by the fairness of our administration of Muslims. So fate was to take a very different turn for all manner of reasons, and perhaps we'll explore some of them today. But it tells you that Venizelos was not right from the beginning somebody who had a vision of a religiously pure Greece, a religiously pure Turkey. That's something that, so to speak, evolved along the way. Now, moving down from high politics, in order to bring home what the population exchange meant at a human level, I'd like to share with you two narratives of the population exchange as it unfolded in Rethymnon. Now, one lightly fictionalized and one from real life, so to speak, from family memories. And together, I'd like to ponder those narratives, interrogate them, ask ourselves, to what extent they they refer as to literal fact, to what extent they're romanticized, to what extent they contain lacunae. All memories have to be interrogated, whether they are presented as true or they're presented as light fiction. Now, the first memory I'm going to share is the famous account by the Cretan novelist Pandelis Prevelakis, describing in very vivid terms what it was like the day that the Turks, as he calls them, in other words, the Muslim residents, left his hometown of Rethymnon. And I'll read it I've changed a couple of words where he says Turks, they put Muslims, just to make it slightly clearer, but you'll get a sense anyway. In spite, it's from his book Chronika Mias Politias, written in 1938, and from a good English translation that was published, I think, in the 60s, again, slightly modified by myself. In spite of all the bloodshed and the stubborn resistance, the Turks, the Muslims, came to forget down the generations that they had come as raiders from a foreign land. Little by little, they took Crete as their own, and they came to love it as their own. My loins are Cretan too, I have often heard the Muslims of Crete say to Greeks. And we youngsters who had grown up after 1899, when we had made peace with the Turk, we felt no hatred for the Muslims, in spite of all the fiery speeches that were made to us by our elders, whose bodies still bore the unhealed scars of battle. When the Turkish army reconquered Izmir, that's in September 22, the hearts of the Muslims in Rethymnon rejoiced, but they never showed it. And when the Christian refugees from Anatolia appeared, and we commandeered most of the mosques to house the Christian homeless, the Turks took the rough with the smooth, and not a single complaint was heard from their lips. A year went by, and we thought that we had turned the corner. And then the fatal news came that Venizelos and Kemal had agreed to exchange the Turkish population of Crete for the Christian refugees who had come in from Anatolia, so that the two races might live at peace once and for all. Everyone was paralyzed when they heard the news, and each asked each other whether they had heard it and whether it could possibly be true. Both sides felt the rumor was unbelievable. They felt as though they were a married couple who might have been at odds, and then the bishop walks in and confirms their divorce exactly when they had forgotten about all their quarrels. In other words, the Christians and Muslims had made peace among themselves, and lo and behold, they get divorced anyway. The Turks were given a few months to make their preparations. They were ordered to board on a given day, and the steamers were prepared to take them. In the whole of Crete, there were living more than 50,000 Turks, and of these, you could hardly have found 200 who would have welcomed expatriation. The rest were heartbroken at being torn from the land of their birth, from their homes and possessions, and each poor soul was in a whirl of indecision as to what he or she should take along. You found some Turks whose houses had only just been built. They were told to leave the keys in the doors and hand the place over just as the last plasterer was quitting. Others in that ill-fated year were waiting for the first crop from their olive trees, trees which need 5 years of tending before they bear fruit. There were shopkeepers who'd stocked up for the year. Now they had to sell their wares for whatever they could get. Some had planted vines, and now others would drink the wine. If a man gets hurt, he will cry out, just as a donkey would. You heard the Turks lamenting like this at being driven into exile. And on the other hand, you saw the Christian refugees beating their breasts because they too had lost their homes. The bitter day came, the steamers dropped anchor offshore, opposite the town, and the Turks moved to embark. Their baggage had been brought down the previous evening. Then they went to say goodbye to their empty houses. There, God knows what came over them. One crazy fellow unhooked the shutters of his house to bring them away to the foreign land, and the idea spread like wildfire, and then the whole Turkish community fell on the woodwork of their houses. They tore down the lattice screens, they took doors off hinges, they ripped up floorboards amidst a fierce storm of emotion, which was the very opposite of the quiet resignation which they had shown till that day. And so, in a twinkling of an eye, the whole Turkish quarter was in uproar, groaning and creaking like a clump of trees being felled or a buffalo being slaughtered. Then the Christians took flight. Somebody spread the rumor that the Turks were planning to set fire to the place and that they were collecting wood for that purpose. The situation grew ugly. The refugees who were waiting for the Turks to move out saw houses being destroyed, and that was happening right in the middle of winter. They snatched whatever weapons they could find, and they rushed to prevent the disaster. Bells were rung, the army came down in a state of readiness, and the whole town was in alert. No words of mine can describe it. The army formed a cordon around the Turkish quarter. They occupied the approaches to the harbor, and they called on the Turks to cross the area one by one and embark. It was a black moment. It felt endless as night. People fainted with emotion. At last, the Turks moved to go down into the ships. They went in with their clothes torn, hands dripping blood. Women had lost their veils. They went by in single file behind a double line of soldiers, as though they were thieves who had been caught stealing, looking askance, red-eyed, teeth clenched with rage. They embarked. The port authorities loaded their baggage in order and stowed them on the steamers. Night fell, day dawned, and the work went on. At noon the next day, we heard the steamers hoot 3 times. The noise of the anchor chains was resounding along the shore. And then there came a single cry from thousands of throats, from men and women and children. A cry which God in his mercy will never allow you to hear. A cry savage and yet imploring, full of misery and fear. The wind caught this sound and it bore it to us in snatches. So that's what Pantelis Prevlakis, writing 14 years later, remembered of those turbulent events in 1923-24. Now, bear in mind, he had a lot had happened in his life. Here he is a young man in Crete, born in 1909, so he was a very young man when these events happened. He then moved to Athens. He joined the literary circles of Athens, which was a very active one at that time. He then studied at the Sorbonne. He studied literature and archaeology at the Sorbonne. So his horizons broadened tremendously. I mean, he was both very much a son of Rhéthenon, a local boy, but also a humanist in every sense, with a very broad humanist vision. And actually, the book of his which sells best now is his book about El Greco, how his fellow Cretan El Greco moved on from Crete and moved to Italy and Spain and developed broader horizons. So Prevlakis is both a very local voice and yet a very broad and humanist voice at the same time. Now, one of the first people he meets on arrival in that's one of the ships leaving, and that's perhaps the sort of scene that he's describing in that dramatic passage that I just read. And one of the first people he meets on arrival in Athens is his fellow Cretan Nikos Kazantzakis, who gives, I must say, a somewhat darker picture of relations between the Christians and Muslims on his home island. In his book, Kapitan Michalis. Here's a very vivid paragraph from Kazantzakis, which is a kind of counterpoint to the Prevlakis view. The Christian cross and the Muslim crescent were yoked together, and sometimes they marched forward in harmony of spirit, but then one of those Cretan hurricanes would blow up, a kind of rage, and each would sink his teeth into the other's neck, as though to bite off a piece of meat and swallow it. So that was Kazantzakis' somewhat darker view than Prevlakis of relations between the faiths in their home island. Now, what can we say now, 100 years on from the exchange, about the Prevlakis view? Is that, I mean, are there certain respects in which it was clearly false or romanticized? Well, of course, he vastly overestimates the number of Muslims left on the island. He says there were 50,000. There were half that number. He probably overstates the degree of intercommunal harmony that existed. It's probably not quite true that they decided to bury the hatchet and send away the divorce proceedings. On the contrary, one hears of sort of violent incidents right up to the moment of the exchange. I'm sure it's not true that the Muslims, until that fateful moment, peacefully accepted their deportation. I'm sure it was a much harsher picture than that. But this is a man sort of at the height of his literary career, remembering something that happened in his youth. And there's clearly a grain, more than a grain, there's a great deal of truth in spirit about the Prevlakis account. Now I'm going to tell you a different narrative of those events in Rhéthenon. It's a family story, it's a true family story. And I'm going to tell it in pictures first, and then in a few words. Now, what the man you see in the middle in the fez is the last Muslim mayor of Rethymnon, Husni Vakoglaki. His surname went into various forms, but let's call him Vakoglaki. Highly intelligent man who was mayor from 1911 until 1918 or 19. So through the period when when Crete became joined to Greece, he remained as mayor, which is remarkable in some ways. And I'm going to tell you his family story as best I can in pictures, and then in a few words. Now, it so happens that Mayor Husni Bey's grandson, Erol Irgir, is a rather prolific writer. He's written a lot about the experience of the Cretan Muslims and their descendants in Turkey. This is a novel he wrote. And the character you see is sort of meant to be a generic sort of Cretan Muslim. It actually happens to be his father, and therefore the mayor's son-in-law. But that's one of the many writings of Erol Irgir, this prolific and highly articulate Turco-Cretan, born in 1930, and therefore born to Greek-speaking parents. Interestingly, in Izmir. So until the age of 7, from his parents, he wouldn't have heard any language except Cretan Greek. But of course, when he went to school, he was socialized in Turkish like everybody else. So I'm going to say a few things sort of in the voice of Erol Irgir. And there's one more generation. That is the daughter of Erol Irgir. That's Ayşe Irgir, who may be following us. I hope she is. And she recently visited Rethymnon, and there you can see her sort of standing underneath the portrait of her great-grandfather. And it was obviously a very emotional visit. Ayşe Irgir runs a very wonderful hotel, Hotel Kalehan in Seljuk near Ephesus. It's an absolute treasure house of interesting artifacts and family mementos, and I strongly recommend it. Now, some more family mementos. The mayor's wife, Ifet Hanım, a prosperous Muslim lady from Chania, who happened to be a close friend of the Venizelos family. According to family tradition, it was actually Venizelos who made the match between his neighbor, Ifet Hanım, and Husni, the mayor. And here you see her at different stages of life, and you see her beautiful wedding dress and her wedding shoes. You can see how sort of elegant and fashionable sort of bourgeois Muslim life was in Chania in, I guess, the very late 19th century, early 20th century. And here are 3 of the mayor's children, and that's on the left-hand side, Güzide Hanım, who's the grandmother of Ayşe, the hotelier, and 2 of her siblings. A fascinating photograph. It's by a studio in Rethymnon. And it almost looks like a mourning photograph. It looks as though sort of one of the family has died, and yet that wasn't the case. Just a very, very beautiful piece of composition in the photography of 3 children. And here is an intriguing photograph in the Irgir and the Husni Bey collection of photographs. I mean, it shows a secondary school, apparently, with kind of adolescent Muslim boys. And a Christian priest whom they identify as a Frenchman, according to family law, and some girls and a woman teacher. Now, I spoke this morning to a Mr. Haris Strathidakis, who knows more about education in Rethymnon than any living human being, and he said that there are things about this photograph that he struggles to identify, and he's going to have to work on sort of interpreting it. He did tell me some very interesting things about education in Rethymnon, which was, there was a very powerful movement, both among Muslims and Christians, to promote education for boys and girls in the town from the 1890s onwards. There is a school building in the middle of Rethymnon, which is known as the Turkiko, which is still a primary school. And this was once a cluster of buildings in which Muslim and Christian education took place at various levels, and both for boys and girls. On the whole, boys and girls were educated separately, Muslims and Christians separately, with one interesting qualification. There was a Christian secondary school for girls, which took education to a higher level than was available to Muslim girls. And Muslim girls from the Muslim elite of Rethymnon were able to attend that school, but subject only to being taken away, obviously, for religion classes. And yet there's another piece of anecdotal evidence that actually one Muslim parent said, no, let my daughter stay for religion classes. I don't want her to be a Christian, but I do want her to know about other religions. So all generalizations have exceptions, especially in these highly ambivalent sort of intercommunal situations. So anyway, there's the photograph you see is an extraordinary and sort of, in a sense, highly ambivalent photograph of secondary education among the Muslims of Rethymnon. There was a very strong Francophile tendency among the bourgeoisie, actually both Christians and Muslims in Crete at that time, and perhaps according to the family scrapbook, the priest is identified as Père Bernardin. Perhaps he was a French priest, and perhaps he was one of the people who was inculcating that strong Francophone strain. Now, I'm going to read you briefly some family memories of Husni Bey, and we'll interrogate them together. My grandfather, Husni Bey, this is Errol the writer speaking. Okay, my grandfather, Husni Bey, went to a famous school in Istanbul, the Galatasaray Lisesi, and he was filled with liberal ideas about human rights. And when he came back to Crete, he used to talk about these ideas of equality with his childhood friend, Venizelos. Venizelos was very interested, although over time, Venizelos became more concerned with the Greek national cause, and so the two men's political ideas diverged, but their friendship remained very strong. Husni Bey became candidate for mayor in 1911. He got more votes than his uncle, Sevdar Klapsarakis, had done. He was more conservative. And it seems that many poor Christians voted for him. And he also enjoyed the quiet support of Venizelos. Husni remembered very well the first time that Venizelos visited Rethymnon as Prime Minister of Greece. It was a custom at that time for the mayor to go out and meet the Prime Minister as he landed at the pier. Now, the Greek Christians of Rethymnon said they would not let Husni Bey go out and meet Venizelos. It's not appropriate for a Muslim to meet the Prime Minister on behalf of our town. But when Venizelos heard this, he said, unless they bring Husni Bey, I will not land in Rethymnon. And so the Greeks went and called him. They brought Husni Bey to the pier, and he shook hands with his old friend Venizelos and invites him to land. There were rebellions everywhere in the island at that time, but there also were Greeks who cared a lot about friendship. So my grandfather Husni Bey told me at those times that he was bothered by a huge armed man who kept walking 5 steps behind him. And Husni Bey used to say, one day, I just couldn't stand this anymore. So I turned around and I came face to face with this huge Greek man. And I opened my jacket and I said, why are you following me? If you want to take my life, here, kill me. At this point, he said, Husni Bey, I'm not following you to kill you. I'm following you to protect you from the rascals. Husni Bey also said that when he studied in Galatasaray, his best friends were the ethnic Greeks. He had a particular friend called Kopasis. Kopasis told him he was going to Chios to try and stop the Turkish-Greek disagreements over property. The last letter he had from Kopasis was from Chios. He said he was going to try and visit Crete as well. And he did his best to sort out certain disputes, but unfortunately he was killed by one of his compatriots with a knife. My grandfather, Husni Bey, used to say that there is no such thing as, one shouldn't differentiate morally between Greeks and Turks, but rather between good people and bad people. For example, Husni Bey's uncle was living on a farm outside Rethymnon, and one night rebels raided the farm and there was a fight and everybody on the farm was killed. The only survivors were 2 children in the house, 2 boys, aged 6 and 8, who hid under a couch. Later, the Greek rebels came to collect the bodies with a priest. The priest noticed 2 boys trembling under the couch. He sat on the couch, he opened his robes, he never moved. He let the Greek rebels collect the bodies, then everybody else left, and the priest got the boys out. He gave them bread and water. He walked them to the nearest Muslim village. They were then sent to Istanbul by my grandfather. They were educated. They became engineers. They settled in Manisa. My grandfather was doing his work in very difficult times, but he was always protected by his closest Greek friends. In fact, there were Greeks who liked him very much, and they were protecting him 24/7. But in those days, there finally came a moment when Venizelos arrived on the island, and as usual, he visited his old school friend in the mayor's building, and he said, Husni Bey, you have to leave Crete. It's not safe for you to be here anymore, and you must take your family away, and I will make sure that your family can get away safely. Now, Husni Bey didn't want to leave, and he actually had the naive idea that the status of Crete might change in the Muslims' favor, and so he stubbornly wanted to stay on. But he said, listen, I won't leave, but I do accept that you will take my family away. That does make sense. And so Venizelos intervened to get a kind of a passport, a travel certificate for Husni Bey's wife, epitomise, and 3 of their children. And Venizelos prepared a passport for the family and provided that they should go to Athens and then to Istanbul. My grandfather, Husni Bey, stayed on the island with other Turks for a while. And then really serious fighting started in Anatolia. And so he decided that he had to leave. And in secrecy, he left his fez and his cane at the mayor's building, and he took a ship to Anatolia. So that's the story of Husni Bey, the mayor, as told by his grandson. And that's the document that was issued with the intervention of Venizelos in order to secure a safe passage for the wife and 3 children of the mayor, an important family heirloom. So once again, I mean, as the family, you know, I spoke for a long time to Ayşe Ergir, and I thank her very much for that conversation. And as she says, you know, there are gaps in the story. You know, there are. I mean, her grandmother, who was sort of a teenage girl, a high-spirited teenage girl at the time, she used to say that the last thing I did before leaving Crete was have a beach party. Now, what a beach party would consist of, in those conditions, one can hardly imagine. But it shows that there were high spirits there, and people weren't going to be excessively depressed by the very hard times that they were living in. So, another rich and fascinating story that has to be interpreted, has to be interrogated. As the family themselves say, there are things they don't know. They have no idea of the date when Husni Bey left. They don't think he stayed all the time until the exchange. So lots of things that they would like to know, but it's, they have their heirlooms, they have the precious objects, the wedding dress, and they try and put the jigsaw pieces together, and they try and understand. So, 2 different perspectives on the Exodus from Rethymnon. Now, in the final minutes of my contribution, I'd like to change gear for a moment and make an appeal for further research on the Muslim Cretans and their descendants in Turkey. And some very good research has been done. And we're going to hear about this very good research from Sophia, whose research is unique, by the way. But rather whimsically, I'd like to suggest that a very promising area for research is what I call sociolinguistics. And very eccentrically, I want to say 1 word each about a place I know quite well, which is Bosnia, and a place that I know extremely well, which is Northern Ireland. Now, one of the strange features of both Bosnia and Northern Ireland is that when it comes to local accents and sub-accents, people from the same village, the same county, the same micro-region tend to speak the same way, regardless of which of the highly segmented communities they belong to. So, for example, as Brendan could confirm, where's Brendan? His grandfather and my grandfather, both came from the western part of Northern Ireland. They both came from County Tyrone, correct? And they would have spoken very much the same way, the same vowels, the same, unusual dialect words. And yet they probably would hardly ever have met because one was Catholic, the other was Protestant, and society was organized to keep people in separate sort of silos, whether it was church or social groups or sports. People led entirely separate lives, and yet they spoke the same way, which tells you that they were actually mixing, maybe falling in love, who knows, certainly doing business, having secret friendships, much, much more than officialdom was allowing. And exactly the same happens in Bosnia. Now, I'm going to rush through to my geolinguistic, and I'm reminding you of the players in Crete. This is Prince George of the Hellenes, the revolution of 1905, Rethymnon as it now is, and I'm going to rush through to sociolinguistics, Bosnia. We think of Bosnia as divided by religion, ethnicity. In fact, Bosnia is divided, former Yugoslavia, let's say, is divided weirdly by dialect, idiolect. Among speakers of Serbo-Croat, there's a joke about how you pronounce the word lijepa, beautiful. Do you say lijepa? Do you say lepa or lipa? And each part of former Yugoslavia and Bosnia in particular has its own way of saying that word. And here's the thing, if you're from central Bosnia, you say lipa, whether you're Serb, Croat, or Muslim. And if you're from, parts of Croatia or Montenegro, it's more likely to be lijepa. So region trumps religion, even in societies where people supposedly have not much to do with each other by religious division. And that's one of the truly intriguing things about, Muslim Crete, Ottoman Crete, and the Cretan community in Anatolia, and something that I think can be researched more, and I think in a more segmented way as well, because there isn't one Cretan dialect. There are several. That's a map of Northern Ireland, which shows you the sort of the isoglosses, the linguistic contours of Northern Ireland. And let me assure you that these subdialects are common to the Protestants and Catholics of each of the given regions. Religion makes no difference, despite the fact that people of different religions sort of hardly meet. Nonetheless, they all speak the same way. And it was the same in late Ottoman Crete. So if we look at this beautiful lady, this beautiful so-called Turkish Cretan lady, before she even speaks, we know that her speech will have certain pan-Cretan features. She may say horevo for horevo. For example, she may she may say edoka instead of edosa. But if you start to talk to her a bit longer, you will, if you're a decent linguist, you will identify features that are either Western Cretan or from Iraklian or Eastern Crete. And the point is that there's not one story of Cretans going to Anatolia. There are many stories at different times and from different places. And it seems to me that there is just about time to do the sociolinguistic research, based on subdialects, based on mini regions, to try and sort of segment and differentiate, our understanding of the experience of these so-called Cretan Turks on arrival in Turkey. I think it seems to me that when we're trying to reconstruct the life of the Muslims in the last 2 decades of their existence in Crete, we're recovering a lost world, a world that is covered by sentimentalism, by nationalism, by the obscurity of family memories. In all manner of ways, we are reaching in the dark, and sociolinguistics might, I humbly suggest, be a way of filling that lacuna. And I know that one of the people who's filled that lacuna is Sophia. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Bruce, for that fascinating account, which tells us a lot, but also begs for more information from people who may know more about that situation of more than a century ago. I'd just like to remind the online audience that they can pose their questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll come to those later. But first of all, it's a great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Sophia Kufopoulou, who has studied sociology and social anthropology with an emphasis on refugee studies. She began conducting research in Turkey in the period from 1990 to 1992 and has continued to pay annual research visits to the area. She's published a study of the Cretan Muslims in a volume edited by René Hirschon. Sophia is the recipient of several awards and has taught at various American universities. Currently, she's an independent researcher working on the aftermath of the 2015 refugee crisis in Greece. She divides her time between the USA and Greece. Her presentation is entitled, rather intriguingly, Oturmak Mirodiasi, Muslim Cretan Experience in Turkey. Sophia.
Hello. I would like to thank the British School and especially Bruce and David for the invitation today. Actually, it's my first time that I present my work in Athens. I have presented it in Crete and in several other places internationally, but never in Athens. As people mentioned, my actual work started not in 1990, but in 1988, when I first visited Junda, Moskonisi Island, and I will talk a little bit about the names. And as part of my studies for the newly founded at that time University of the Aegean. And later, with a lot of different difficulties, I managed to take a scholarship between the Greek and the Turkish state and go to Turkey to conduct field work. We were talking about the time that Özal was in the politics. Turkey was coming out from a dictatorship, and it was difficult for a Greek person to conduct field work in Turkey. So there are a lot of stories around this, which is not the topic of today, but definitely the topic of today. It is that I was investigating Muslim Cretans, and I lived in a village for 2 years. And during that stay of mine, I always had the issue, but I am Greek. In other words, how do people respond to me and how they will respond to a Turkish person or to a much more neutral category, a British person, an American, and so on. And I will put that as a question mark because I'm still searching to understand. And actually, because of this presentation, I visited recently the island, and I felt more confident than I used to feel. So, what does oturmak myrodiasi mean? And here is one of my favorite people on the island, the famous Ismet Altai. And you will see other pictures of hers. She has been in movies, she has been in books, in the TV, because she was the first group of the part of the first visit to Rethymno. And so this is Ismet with her Mavros. Mavros was her cat because he was black. And one day, Ismet she was having a little pension, and I asked her in Greek. By the way, in order to go to conduct the field work, I spent a lot of time learning Turkish. But at the point that I arrived there, I realized that my Turkish was useless, especially talking with first-generation people. And I started to learn Giritse, the Cretan dialect. Either it was the Rethymnos dialect or the Chania dialect. Unfortunately, we had from Candia, from Iraklio, very few families. So when I asked that question, there was also in the presence of a Turkish lady that she came to actually build a home. And so I asked her, Ismet, please let me help you to drain these clothes, because she had washed her linens from the pension with, I don't know if you have ever seen those type of washing machines that they were mainly hand operated, and then you had to rinse them. And they were sitting there, and I was afraid that they will be molded. And so then the other Turkish lady offered also to help. And her response to me, it was to both of us, actually, looking to both of us, you're right, έχεις δίκιο. they will get oturmak myroδιασή. So, oturmak myroδιασή, what does it mean? In English, it's sitting smell. But the interesting thing, it was that oturmak is the verb to sit, and myrodia is the Greek word for smell. And the suffix C, it was the proper suffix to create the genitive. So instead of saying in Turkish, oturmak kokushu, which is the suffix koku, kokushu, she used the Greek word with the Turkish suffix. And for at that time, it was what Fernandez has mentioned in his work, the revelatory incident, what I'm doing here. And what I was doing there, it was to try to smell their sitting smell after, at that time it was 72 years of existence on the island of Junda. Now, names and language used. I will start from the last one, my personal choice. Despite my English, they are not just like yours, and my accent is very heavy, but I prefer when I talk about these people, I always speak in English. Why? Because I believe that English is a neutral language, and the terms that we use, they can show also, if we will use them in Greek or in Turkish, our political position regarding the subject. So at this point, this does not mean that I'm not taking a political position. Of course I take, and I don't believe to that general neutrality, but I try to find as much as I can the so-called truth. So what is their name of this population, the exchanged people? Muslim Cretans, Turco-Kritiki, Cretians, Giritli, which is the term that they use. The truth it is that in my staying there, I never encountered the term Turco-Kritiki. The term Turco-Kritiki, it is used in the Greek language much more before the creation of the Turkish state. And for me, it shows a certain political position. And that's why I disagree with the concept when it is used. I prefer, in order to differentiate them from the nowadays inhabitants of Crete, to use the British description Muslim Cretans, or in general, when I talk about them, and you will see that in a little bit, I use the word kritiki, which is the way that they self-label themselves. Or in front of a Turkish audience, they use the word giritli. Now, I did my research in Junda. I prefer call it Junda, because this is how they call it the locals. Either they are exchange people from the island of Mytilene, of Lesbos, and they call themselves Midili, or they are Kritiki. Now, this specific island has 3 different names, except Junda. It is the official name is Alibey, and it's actually the general that he expelled the Greek population from the island of Moschonisi. Moschonisi was the Greek term during the time that the Greeks were staying there. And also there are ekatonissos, there are different words that they have been used in Greek. So what does it mean, Junda? There are different, how I can say, the different ways or interpretations. I stay with a very simple one. As we will see, in the map, the island of Junda. It's very close to Alibe, and it is just like a chonda. Are you familiar with the word chonda? Huh? A piece. And this is the one explanation that the locals gave it to me, actually. It's not that I made it up. A lot of the locals, they used that. What I did, I arrived to the island on January 91, and I stayed for 18 months there. At the end of the second year, I decided at that point that perhaps fieldwork is not enough. Again, my agony, do I understand? Do they say what I want to hear? Or what do they say to the other Turkish people? Actually, I was even begging to find a Turkish anthropologist to conduct the research together. But at that point, it was impossible. So at the end of the second year, I decided to move to my sociological background, and I conducted 80 family questionnaires with 139 questions. It's now 80, it means one interview every day, at least 6 hours. And then I used also my anthropological, let's say, talents. I learned to say the coffee. So I became finally a famous coffee reader. And I had a very good reputation for massage to the elderly people. And what was the third? Family pictures. I was taking them family pictures. So this was the way that I could keep the husband and the wife together for so much time. And so this questionnaire, it was closed, but at the same time, I had the opportunity to keep everything else. So in other words, it was closed in the majority of the questions, but also in a lot of the others, I was getting a lot of information as an open questionnaire. Now, what I will discuss with you today, I will discuss a little bit about the journey, the arrival, the quarantine, the settlement. Then, at the same time, I will discuss the first years until World War II. I will go to some things very quickly, and I'm expecting from you questions, because, okay, I decided to put everything, and this is the world of my life, so it is impossible in 25 minutes. And then the second period, 1950s to 1980s, the third period from 80s to today, and this is the enactment of tourism, and this is very important. And I would like to discuss also the latest things that they happened in Turkey from the 90s and 2000, especially with the opening of Erdogan between 2000 and 2006, if I remember well, where he was trying to persuade the Europeans that the country, it was good enough for everybody, and they were trying to open, and this is where we have the creation of exchanged people organizations. If you want to learn more about this, I brought you one of their publications. It is published both in Greek and in English, and it is stories of the exchange at that time. All of these things, all of these timings, I would like to examine through gender, politics, economy, education, and religion. So the departure, I found this picture recently in the newspaper Vima, but it shows a very different picture of what I collected in my data. In my interviews, do you see the women that they are all covered here? In my interviews, the people that I interviewed, they were belonging most probably to a different class. And this is something that I would like to point out, because when we discuss about identity issues, we try to generalize things independently of their class and status in the society. And I consider that this is wrong, because the experiences could be very different. So this is the boat that they came, the boat named Turkey, and theoretically, according to Ali Onai, was whom I am indebted. So except this mete, I had Ali Onai and the Sevengul family as my own families in the village that they were protecting me. So according to him, it was bought by, it was an old Norwegian boat. Then the new government, they refixed it, they called it Turkey. And this is what brought the Crete to Junta on the 24th May 1924 from Crete. Meanwhile, on January, we have the first settlers that they come from the island of Lesbos. Now, the rich ones and the urban population had moved earlier to big cities, 1912, and the rest of them that they stayed there, they moved to Ayvalık, to the city near Junta. So on the island of Junta, you had mainly a population from the rural settlement of the Muslims in Sigri. It's western of, in Lesbos, northwestern, and from the village of Komi, which is on the eastern side. Both of them, they were from the rural environment. So this is a map of Ayvalık, and this is what I call, they call it the Jonda, you see, the Ali Bey Adasi, and the place that they landed, it was actually there. You see where it says Ali Bey, and there is a small bay. So, and this is what they saw when they came. These pictures have been taken by the book that was published by the Miet του Δημήτρη Ψαρού, του Αϊβαλή και η Μικρασιατική Αιωλίδα, which he has done an extremely interesting job about the area. So this is also a picture from that book, and it shows the different churches that they existed in Moschonesi. And this is another picture from my personal archive. And here I use a picture that I took in '92, but it has nothing to do, but it has to do with the arrival. When I was asking the people, what was your experience on the boat? Actually, the younger population that at that time that I interviewed, they were already old enough. They were telling me that it was just like a cruise. We had a very good time, and we were, they were playing music, mandolino, and they were playing the lira, and so on. But when they arrived there, the locals, they decided to welcome them, as well as the Mytilini, the people that they came, with daoulia, with drums. And the kids were scared because they never heard that type of music before in their life. And Ismete actually says, we were raised with a sweet melody of mandolino and lira, and suddenly we had these bam boom things, and we didn't know what to do, so we were hiding under the skirts of our mothers. So I use this picture despite the fact that it's from a Kurban Bayram celebration, and obviously now they are used to that music, and these people, they go there to get paid. So this means that they have an income by visiting the island. So they landed here, and this is the house of the bishop, Despotinevi, it's called in Turkish, or in Greek, to spiti to despoti. I don't want to tell you about the story of this house, but what I would like to mention, it is that this is where the quarantine started. And theoretically, all of these people, they have to go, just like the Christians that they came to Greece, they had to go through a certain period of quarantine, mainly for not spread any diseases or pandemics. But they were telling me that at nights they were going to the village and they were trying to find which house is empty. And so some of them, they stayed for very little. So the other thing that it's interesting, in 1987, when I first visited this village, the two people, they called that the house of Venizelos, and not the house of Venizelos, the house of the daughter of the Venizelos. First, Venizelos never went there. Secondly, as I know, he never had a daughter. So as a result of that, they were trying to interplay in their mind their past with their present. And this is what, and I will talk a lot about this, some of the theoreticians that I use, they talk that memory is not something that it is always there, but it's a process which is continuously reconstructed by the present. So at this point, later this house became a school. For years, it was ready to be ruined. And of course, now it became a hotel. The state, but they kept the name, Despotinevi. So these are some of the pictures of the houses in Junda from my personal archive. And these are some of the houses from the Psaros book, Το Αϊβαλή και η Μικρασιατική Αεολίδα. Now, one of the main complaints of the people, it was that the deposition, in other words, the difference between the Christian population and the Muslim population, and as Renée Hirschon talks a lot about in her work, it is that in one case you have people that they had to run to be saved. As a result of that, very few people, they had deeds of their property and so on. But in this case, the Muslim Cretans, not only they had their deeds of their property, but a lot of them, they managed to sell their property and bring that cash back to bring their cash with them, how they brought them. Ali Bey was showing to me that the furniture that they were bringing, they had holes, and I saw it, and they were putting all of the gold coins there, and they were closing. Why? Because as you mentioned it, when they left, they could bring their, as they call it, brate. And the way I'll say that in Greek, they told me, εμείς δεν είμαστε πρόσφυγες, δεν είμαστε μουχατζίριδες. Μουχαντζίρ is the Turkish word for a refugee. Εμείς είμαστε μουμπαντελοί. In other words, we are not refugees, but we are exchange people. Why? Γιατί φέραμε μαζί μας τον μπράτη μας. Because we brought with us our own things, the clothes, and you will see some of these elements in a little bit. So to go back, to go here, you have seen Ismetes earlier. You can see her now as a little girl going in the school in Rethymno. It's the first picture of hers. And she was the only one that I met, at least, that she was educated in Ottoman Turkish, in excellent Greek, not the Cretan Greek, and also later she went to the modern Turkish school that was created for the people that they moved there. And next to her is her uncle, that he was also educated and he could speak both Ottoman Turkish and Greek and the Cretan dialect. And he was the one that he was part actually of the committee that they were deciding what the Cretans they will take. And he had to listen to the complaints of the Kritiki that the Midili, that they had less property than us, they took all of the best houses and all of the fertile olive groves because they came earlier, and we didn't get anything, and you need to do something to give us the good seats and kick out the Midili people from inside the houses, or the yearly people, the local people, which they were not a lot, but they came from some other places and they were trying to take positions. Now, this is not a theme that it is staged. If you will check the book Crossing the Aegean, edited by René Hirson, which is the first attempt that Greek and Turkish academics, they came together to discuss the exchange of the people, you will see a lot of articles, and especially the article by Ayhan Akhtar, that he mentions a lot of the issues that the new Turkish state had regarding the properties, because they came, a lot of the majority of them, with all of these deeds. They went to areas where Greeks they used to stay, that they were already looted. And by whom they were looted? By the local people, and in one sense, also by the army, because Ayhan Akhtar gives some data where lower Turkish officers, they could be paid by organizing, selling the furniture and the objects in the house. So anyway, in a lot of cases, according to Ayhan Akhtar and his sources, there were a lot of houses that they didn't have windows, they didn't have doors, not only furniture and so on. Let's not forget that a lot of the local people's houses, they were burned down by the Greek army when the Greek army was there. So another picture of the different people, but this picture is actually from Crete, and I show it to you because I would like to discuss with you the memorabilia and the material culture. So another interesting picture is, again, this, where on the right side you can see the parents of Alionae. And the newer information that I got, it was that because of the father, that he was a clever businessman even in Crete, he came first to Ayvalik to check how is the place. He traveled to other places in Izmir and Kusadasi and so on. And then he decided that his family, they will get in the boat to go there. And on the right, you can see the lady with a hat. Now, people that they arrive, you can see these pictures are taken in Turkey. So I don't think that they seem very different, especially the right one, from pictures from Britain or from Ireland. What do you think? With the dressing coat and the lady with the hat and so on. These are a family of Ali Bey, and these people, they had to move from Junda and they went to Izmir and to Istanbul, some others, because they couldn't get any opportunities for jobs there. So this is what I call material culture. You can see this buffet. This buffet came from Crete. The same thing with porcelain dishes. Some of the blue vases there, actually I'm very honored that they gave me one of the two of them as a gift. But at the same time, there are artifacts that definitely they are not from Crete, just like this lamp with the evil eye, or that sweet vase with the evil eye. So this is how they decorate their houses. And even now that I went, they never took this. Every house is just, it has a small place, just like a museum. So, women in Crete. And again, on the right side, you can see a lady in the 1930s. And on the left side, you can see a lady on the in the 1950s. So think about that we are talking about a village. And despite the fact that photography is usually photographs from the past, and you know it very well if we have any social historians here, they are usually part of the bourgeois class. Still, these pictures can tell a lot of the things about the families there. And we can see some other pictures again from the Alionae family. The lady on the right is the mother in the first picture, the one that she wears the black. Perhaps it looks familiar to you, for those of you that you are Greeks. And the reason that it looks familiar, she was freshly widowed when this picture was taken. I remember my grandmother wearing a scarf here in Greece and black when she became a widow. And on the left, the other lady is the lady that we saw in the white clothes earlier and with the hat, and she was actually also a widow, but she was, her husband died much more. Now, and here is Fatma Hanum in the late 40s, 50s, introducing long pants into the island of Junda. So it's, for me, it's a very interesting picture. Why? A lot of the studies regarding the Cretan women, they talk about that they are modern women. They are dressed according to the last fashion statement. Can you believe that I learned about light food only when I went in 90 and I started to do my field work? They started to tell me that they are Cretan food because it is based on a lot of herbs and so on. It's light food. And I said, what does it mean, light food? And then they explained to me where they read it in the newspaper. Or the newspapers at that time, they were promoting the little black dress that every lady should have in her wardrobe, the little black dress. So for them, it was a big thing. Why? Because black is the color of the Cretan woman. And in other words, that we are not in fashion, but we are also part of that westernization process. And that's why the Cretan women, from the beginning to the end, they actually promote that. I got scared that I finished. How my time is doing. Okay. They were promoting that modern type of lifestyle. I'll give you an example. All of you, most probably you know, that the house is a very private space in the Muslim culture. And that's why, and it should be pure, where outside of the house, it's the public and it is dirty by its definition. That's why people are taking their shoes off in order to enter to their house. The interesting thing it is that when I was going to meet the elite people, they were giving me a pair of slippers, or I could bring slippers. But the ladies that I was participating in different gatherings, they were always bringing their black heels with shiny leather, never slippers. It was considered kaba. Kaba, it means keilu, village-wise. This for the villagers, you know. So, and here I am to Ahmed Amja. I'm trying now to speed up and I would like to tell you my first encounter with him after it was the general things. Oh, you are Ellinitissa, I am Kritikos, and so on. But at a certain point, when we became more friendly, he started to tell me that, look at this, Sophia. I speak my mother tongue. My mother was Romania, Greek, and my father was Turkish. As a result of that, in my veins, look at my veins, they have both of the blood. I carry both of the blood. Now, this is something that I could hear it from a lot of people, not in such a strong statement, that, but we continue to speak Cretan because of our mothers, and this is the mother tongue where we are Turkish from our fathers. Let's not forget that the Turkish kinship system, it is patrilineal. What does it mean this? That the line regarding the religion does not come from the mother, it comes from the father. So that's why it is permissible to marry women outside of their religion, where the opposite is the scandal. When Turkish women marry non-Greek men. Now, what was the Turkish socio-political context of the exchange of Muslim Cretans? Now, again, I made a very small point here. Why? Because it is important to understand in which conditions these people came. What was the socio-political context and how different was, which I will not have the time now to discuss it, from the Greek one. And we have the creation of the Turkish state. We have the modernization process of Turkey according to Ataturk. We have the erase of the Ottoman past and everything that it was associated before 1923. And we have the introduction to the Turkish history thesis, where the locals, in one sense, they actually, as Çaklar there mentioned it, embrace it because of the fact that that Turkish history thesis, which if you don't know it, we can discuss it later, it actually mentions the idea that a lot of the populations, which we consider them Westerners and so on, the base, they were Turkish people. And of course, we have the Citizens Speak Turkish campaign. Citizens Speak Turkish campaign that it started by a group of law students and so on. What does this mean? In order to, we are talking about a nation state, and Ataturk was talking a lot of the ideas of, as we know, of the Yeni Turks, of the Neo-Turks, and he had different ideas regarding the expansion and so on. He got a lot of ideas from Gökalp about Turkishness, and at the same time that he was, I think, one of his mentors, correct me if I'm wrong, but what he tries to do, it is, he got a Turkey, where in Turkey, according to Andrews, that he did the first ethnic research in Turkey in the 80s, and it is called Ethnicity in Turkey. There is the everyday saying, Türkiye'de 72,5 millet var. In Turkey, there are 72.5 millet. Now, what is the half? The Gypsies, the Romas, as we call them now. But so, and the Cretans are mentioned inside that research. So they try, he takes all of these different groups and tries to homogenize them under the Turkish identity. He introduced his ideas from the Western world. He brings a new language by introducing in the 1924, if I remember well. And I will tell you exactly. By 1924, the educational system was united under the Ministry of Education. So in other words, religious schools started to go down. By 1926, the new government adopted the European calendar, the Swiss law system, and the Italian criminal law. All of the above were giving rights to women, especially in the area, oh my God, especially in the area of family and inheritance laws. By 1928, they adopted the Western numbers and the Latin alphabet, as well. In 1931, adopted the Western weight and length measurement. Finally, by 1934, we have two major changes: vote to women and changes of names. So what happened, it is that Their names, as you mentioned earlier, Pyrovolakis, Pyrovoluthena was the female, Manzanos, which comes from eggplants. He was cultivating eggplants. Mazanou was Fatma Manzanou, his wife, and so on. All of these people, they had to change and adopt a name that it was a Turkish name. And this is what happened at that time. So in general, I cannot finish the presentation, but I can go very quickly over the pictures. This is characteristics of the political life, celebrations of state holidays, elections in Junta. You can see Smeta is one of the first ones that she will go early in the morning to vote, and she was very proud of this. She had a very interesting idea about politicians, and she didn't like Ozal because she was CHP, and she used to say, you look at him, how much of this he has? Just like my neck now, you know, double neck, because they eat. And, but ours is in Onu was very thin. Anyway, music, Cretan music, which unfortunately has disappeared after the death. So here we have different religious celebrations. And for me, it is important, this is the headreless celebration, which you will see on the right up picture, red eggs. The headreless, and if you will see a little bit also the bread, it is what we call in English challah bread, in Greek tsoureki. So they make tsoureki and red eggs. And why? Because they associate headreless, despite the fact that it's not that it is associated with the celebration of St. George. But it's not, it's about Prophet Elias. But still they create that mixture. And here they are putting all of their wishes to the sea, but written only in Ottoman. So the person that had to write this, it was Smeta because she was the only one. So for days, people, they were coming to her village to write down the wishes. This is another celebration. It is Kandil. It's Smeta that she gave me the permission to take her pictures. And there are 5 different Kandils during the 3 holy months. And it was interesting that in the Kandil, guys, she was giving the prayers with Ottoman, Arabic, the language of Quran. But when it was the time to pray, it was only Greek. Nothing in Turkish, it was pure Greek. So, Kurban Bayram, and here it is Altin Günü, it's a rotating credit association. Women, they continue to celebrate. It started, we are arriving now from the 80s and after. It's a forum to collect money, and by exhibiting their social networks and by keeping their Cretianness. So all of the women that you see here, they are all of Cretan descent. If there was 1 or 2 Yabanji foreigner, it will be a bride, and they will try to teach her how to cook, how to do certain things, and so on. This is in the public, and here I am, and if you want, I can talk to you about this later.
First of all, I'd like to invite members of the audience here in Athens to put any questions or comments on what they've heard to our 2 speakers. There is a microphone here which Katrina will take, so please wait until the microphone reaches you and then put your question or comment.
This is for Bruce Clark. I have a very simple question. In a slight comparison with 16th century Spain, could you convert in Crete and save your house and your skin and your property? Could you stay if you converted?
I mean, very good question. I mean, certainly there were at various stages in the 19th century, there were conversions from Islam to Christianity, but last minute conversions were very difficult indeed. I mean, just a few isolated cases of people who used subterfuge. I mean, for example, there was the extraordinary story of a lady who arrived in Chania in 2002 from Turkey, and she found her blood sister. Now, her blood sister had been obviously born into a Muslim family, and then somehow kind of went underground for 2 years around the time of the exchange, and then sort of resurfaced and got baptized as a Christian, and was then sort of socialized and integrated into the Greek community. But really a handful of cases, and using extreme subterfuge is the answer.
Can I add something here? There is a lot of research recently because, as I said, the people that I interviewed, they insist about that patrilineal descent regarding religion. But research has shown nowadays from Muslim academics and historians that we have a lot of conversions during the 19th century. So a very good article is by a couple at the Yeke. I don't know if I pronounced their name well. If you want to have more information, there is in English too. Unfortunately, the rest of their work is in Turkish. But also you have a lot of love stories where people married Fatma's Teyze, her maternal aunt, Maria fall in love with a Christian boy. They got married. She was the same of the family and nobody was talking until in the 80s that the descendants, you know, the sons, her cousins came to visit her from Rethymno, and then they established a relationship.
Thank you. More questions?
Just a very quick question and comment. Actually, it was a wonderful, personal, and very almost intimate account. And I thank you both very, very much for giving us this view. One of the questions I have, and I'm not going to hog this, I promise, is so when we talk about exchange populations and there's a certain kind of level of pride of people who come from Asia Minor to Greece. Is that same level of pride in the reverse?
Absolutely. They have built up their identity based upon that feeling, let's say, of superiority. And I always thought that it was my interpretation until I met recently a Turkish Mytilenean descent, very well-educated gentleman, and from a very well-to-do family background. And he still told me the Cretians, they always looked at us in a very snobbish way. And the interesting thing it is that in the village that I did the research, the majority of them, they were coming, actually it was half and half, from rural areas, but they established the images of their fellow city dwellers, and they started to develop an image about their past, which is usually, it's not a new case. You can see it in all of the refugee studies about how they imagine their past. But it's interesting that you can see, that's why I show you all of these pictures with the dressing and the way. There is an anthropologist of memory called Connerton, and Connerton talks about habitual memory. And habitual memory, it's the memory that it is embodied. And you can see that even now.
I think there were more questions in the audience.
Sorry, I'll be right back.
Thank you. It was a very nice both presentations, and thank you for the idea to discuss such matters here. I would like to ask you, what about the language of the questionnaires? You gave a very long questionnaire with 139 questions, if I may. So what language? And did you have a response rate, or you sit close to them and you are asking, translating, whatever?
In which language?
Nobody can hear you online.
Okay. The language of the questionnaires were written in English, but I was translating to them in a lot of cases in Turkish or in Greek. And then it is interesting that where I had to put writing comments and so on, I had to do to the language that it was adopted. But it's interesting because I decided to do it a very objective one. So I went to the Muhtar, which was the local community man, and I said, after 1 year that he knew me, let's make a draw to find the first person for the snowball. And he said to me, are you joking me? You know all of these people. Why you don't do it to them? I said, no, there is a reason. So I had to explain to him the snowball technique. And in my first one was a disaster. We can talk about that later. And so then I go again to the Muhtar the next day. I said another one because there was that mentally ill person in the first case. So I said, let's start it again. It is interesting that in whatever language I was conducting the interview, when they were referring me to the 5 families, it was all with their Cretan names, never with their Turkish name. For me, this is very important.
I've got a question online now, which may be answered by either of you. It goes something like this. Why do the Cretan Muslims still preserve their Cretan identity into the 3rd or 4th generation? Now, I think this is begging the question, do the Cretan Muslims still preserve their Cretan identity into the 3rd or 4th generation? And if so, why?
Okay, it starts as following. Why we are who we are. Okay, we all want to have an identity. We all want to belong to somewhere. So this is a very, very simplistic answer. I said to a Cretan friend of mine in America that he asked me why I still love Crete, which I have nothing to do with them. I said, because you are weird and you try to actually excuse your weirdness as the Cretan one. Anyway, this is the joke. The real answer, it has to do if they preserve it or not. My recent visit was very disappointing. One of the reasons that they really recreated their Cretan identity, at least in Giunda, it had to do with contrabando, with the Greek TV and radio, until the time that I visited Giunda, that it started the private Turkish channels. And so they had more choices. And then we have the visit of the Greek tourism. Let's not forget that Greeks were the first ones that they started to create that touristic movement to Turkey, that they were going as pilgrimages to find their places. So At this point in Junda, the tourism is actually Turkish. It's mainly Turkish, very rich Turkish people. I will tell you an example that the housing market, when I was there, one of these houses that I presented to you earlier, they were $15,000. Now, a house just like that, a smaller one, it starts 350,000 euro. So the Greeks, they stopped going there because they believe that it's very expensive. And this is not my saying, you can see it in different magazines online and so on. In the rest of the Turkey now, there is another answer. In the rest of the Turkey, you remember that I talked to you about Erdogan and his openings. And so for the first time, we have the Lausanne Mubadele organization that it started in 2000. I had also prepared a little video for them, but forget it now. And it talks about the exchange of the population. And they try to come together to preserve their memories. Why? Let's not forget that the nation state, as it was constructed in Greece and in Turkey and in other European countries, has changed. Now we are talking about multicultural nation states. So the difference is accepted, more or less, okay? Accepted to a point. But so this opening of Erdogan enabled these people to organize themselves. And at this point, we have 17 Muslim Cretan, at least 17 Muslim Cretan organizations. For 11 years, they do a picnic festival where they invite people from Crete and they celebrate in near Izmir. Now, it is interesting that the place that it was, according to my opinion, most Cretan of all, does not have any organization.
I'll simply say just very briefly that, I mean, one sort of factor in the survival of the Cretan identity is that an ideology has been developed which makes it possible to call yourself a proud Cretan and at the same time be a loyal Kemalist and a citizen of the Republic of Turkey. You can say, yes, we love Crete, we're from Crete, we're proud to speak Cretan as our home language, but we also like the fact that Kemal rescued us. He was such a nice man. He sent ships to bring us to this safe country. So it's possible ideologically to be a loyal Cretan and also a loyal citizen of the Republic.
Thank you very much. I think we have to bring the discussion to a close. Of course, those who are here in the room will be able to continue over a drink now. There are more questions online. I'm well aware of that. In answer to one questioner, as far as I know, Michael Hertzfeld is not here, so he can't tell us about his researches in, is he? No. In Crete. And there are some other quite complicated questions that I think probably we haven't got time to deal with now, but it has been an absolutely intriguing presentation, so a wealth of material that deserves at least one complete book. And I hope that will happen in due course. This event has been recorded and will be posted on the BSA website in due course once it has been edited. So I wanted to conclude by asking you to show your appreciation for the two speakers and for their wonderful presentations today. Thank you, Sophia.